It is time for Sportsmemo's Every Game on the Board podcast, College Football Edition with Rob Veno. Rob, welcome into the podcast.
Hey, Drew, how are you? Glad to be here today. A little bit of a little rain here outside of Philadelphia and then a little sunshine, but I think we're going to get a lot of rain as well as the coastal areas between South Carolina and North Carolina. All their rain is going to come our way, so we're battening down a little bit too.
Yeah, and guys, we're going to be hitting on the college football card. Pretty much the first third of it. Start at the top with Boston College, Wake Forest, and head down to the Vanderbilt Notre Dame game. So if you got your Sports Memo odds page up, those are the games we'll be hitting on today's podcast. Then we'll be back tomorrow's podcast finishing out the college football card. Rob hit on it. Weather is likely going to be a factor in a bunch of games, primarily on the East Coast this week. So for totals bettors, really even for side bettors, it's something you got to pay attention to. We'll be talking about it a bunch in certain games. Rob, we got to get going here. Long podcast, but not too long. A fun one. So excited to talk about it. And we got starting off with 103-104. Boston College, Wake Forest. Looks like Boston College laying 4.5 on the road, 53 the total. What do you got on BC Wake, Robbie?
Well, it's a huge divisional game inside the ACC, right? So that's the first order of business for both of these teams. We saw Wake Forest a couple of weeks ago, opening night against Tulane, where they had to play the freshman quarterback, true freshman, Sam Hartman, and he looked real good, but they did struggle to get out of there with a victory against the Tulane Green Wave. There's a couple of things in play here, though, Drew, that are important to look at when you go over this game. The first one is there's no question Wake Forest hasn't seen a quarterback-running back duo like what they're going to see out of Boston College in this game. Last year, Wake Forest goes to Chestnut Hill and wins 34-10. You know, that sticks in the back of Boston College's mind. And now with quarterback Anthony Brown, who's become a pretty good passer this season. Last year, a little ineffective, inaccurate with his throws so far this season. 71% completions, 4 TDs, no interceptions, real good numbers out of Brown. And, of course, you know, on a national level, running back A.J. Dillon is recognized as one of the best in the country. So Wake, after playing Tulane and Willie Fritz's kind of gimmicky pistol triple option offense and then Towson State, now they're going to face a team that's going to come right at them. And they've got some injuries at Wake Forest, Drew, that could make a difference here. This is a team that, as we speak right now, has lost 7 players so far this year to torn ACLs. Now, every single one not a starter, but of significance when you look at Wake Forest. And generally, when we handicap these games as the season goes on, we're not just looking for individual injury. We're looking for cluster injury to a certain portion of the football team. And for Wake Forest, that area is without question the defensive backfield, where they've got 35 career starts missing last week in their game against Towson State. Getting a little bit healthier, but still there's a weakness in that secondary. BC likes to run first, but as I mentioned earlier, Anthony Brown's throwing the ball a little bit better. Could be troublesome for Wake Forest in that secondary in this game. The other side of the coin for me is the way Wake Forest plays offense nowadays. I know BC's going to be the best defense that they've seen up until this point, but Hartman looks pretty good as of right now, and they do have the receiving core led by Greg Dortch to do some damage. The offensive line injuries have really been covered up. Wake Forest, lucky for them, drew very, very deep across the front on the offensive line, so they're able to, go on even despite the fact that they lost their left tackle. I think it's a real good game. Point spread here, 4.5. We saw a lot of movement towards BC. I get it. Boston College has come out of the chute on fire, outscoring opponents 117-35. Those opponents offensively, Massachusetts and Holy Cross, not quite what Wake Forest is. But I still think that Wake Forest is in a little bit of trouble here with those secondary injuries. I think BC, diverse enough offensively, certainly revenge-seeking from last year's 34-10 loss at home. I think BC probably gets it done here. Just not thrilled with the rise in the point spread in this game, but still think BC's by far the better side.
Robbie, we got a Friday night game, but first, before that, did want to let everybody know we're doing a special here. It's a text club. It's 100% free to all the podcast listeners out there. And all you got to do is text Sportsmemo to 33222. That's the number, 33222. And just text Sportsmemo to that number, and you'll get $30 a welcome bonus just for doing that to use on sportsmemo.com. You can use it towards daily plays, extended service, whatever you'd like. That number's 33222. Just text Sportsmemo to that number. Robbie, another weekday game here. We got Georgia State traveling to Memphis to take on the Memphis Tigers. This is kind of an interesting one. You wouldn't think so with the point spread, although you could have a couple different views of both of these teams, Robbie, which I do. It's kind of a tough one to figure out. 58.5 the total. Memphis laying 27.5 at home. What's your opinion, Georgia State, Memphis, Friday night?
Well, my initial thought is that Georgia State will probably have a hard time keeping up with the passing game of Memphis. Last week against NC State, the 41-7 final signifies a blowout for NC State. The 32 of 39 for 82% completions by NC State last week. And I know Ryan Finley's a veteran quarterback, but 32 of 39 for 426 and 82%. That doesn't bode well for a team that's coming in to play Memphis. Quarterback Brady White for Memphis, the Arizona State transfer, could have a field day against this Georgia State pass defense. 39 dropbacks last week by NC State. Georgia State did manage to get to the quarterback 3 times, but NC State a little bit of a different pass offense. Memphis gets it out quicker. I don't know that Georgia State's going to be able to handle the passing game of Memphis. We know Memphis likes to go real fast under Mike Norvell, and they're pretty efficient doing so. So the question becomes, can Georgia State score and hang within this number against Memphis? And we've seen the number do nothing but go up, right, from 22.5 all the way to 27.5, a 5-point move on Memphis. Interesting that the total's been knocked down a little bit here, Drew. 59 to 58.5 doesn't seem to correlate with the way the money's moving. I don't know that Memphis State's defense is good enough to keep Georgia State out of the end zone a few times here in this game. So for me, I would probably look over just, from a fundamental standpoint, that Memphis should have no trouble moving the football. And Georgia State, when they get it back, I think can do enough with Ellington and company to score enough to get that thing over the number. It could move. I mean, we're sitting here on Wednesday afternoon talking about a total of 58.5. It's a standalone game on Friday. That number could jump. So if you were going to play it, you'd probably want to play it now.
Yeah, I would agree with you, especially if there's no weather issues. I could see nothing but over money coming in with a singled-out game. A lot of public bettors. So I'm with you. If you like the over, and as long as there's not major weather issues, I would get in sooner rather than later. We got 107-108 bringing us to the Saturday card, Robbie. UTEP versus Tennessee, 47.5 the total, 30.5 Tennessee laying in Knoxville. Any opinion on this one?
Probably zero interest in it, just because the UTEP rebuild is going to be a real struggle for Dana Dimmel. We talked about him a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and the jump from K-State and what is a pretty secure program to UTEP, where, like I say, the Sean Kugler era left that team pretty much in shambles, and Dana Dibble's there to pick up the pieces. A lot of the offseason talk was that they were going to try and diversify the offense, because under Kugler, it really was nothing but hand the football off and try and play defense. Here, UTEP just doesn't have the weapons to consistently move the football on drives. And after watching a couple of games of Tennessee defense, I think for sure that Jeremy Pruitt has the defense going in the right direction, especially against outmanned opponents, which is what UTEP will be in this game. When Tennessee comes to the forces that be, or comes up against the forces that be in the SEC, their defense might look a little bit different. But right now, against a team like this, I could see them dominating the game. That's probably why the total has come down from 51 to 47.5. Not a lot of UTEP points expected in this game. However, from a side perspective, can you trust what you see on Tennessee's offense right now, even against a broken down Texas El Paso team? Can you figure them to score enough to cover 30.5 at Chris now 31? I don't know that I can. Like I say, a game for me that has zero interest. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be a long, long year for Dana Dimmel and Texas El Paso.
Robbie, we got 109-110 Ball State at Indiana, 57.5 the total, 14.5 the spread, pretty much across the board. Do want to know your opinion on this one. Obviously, a MAC team versus a Big Ten team. But also, can you confirm that this is an in-state rivalry? Is Ball State in the state of Indiana?
Ball State is that I can confirm. It's in the state of Indiana. So, I've never heard it referred to as an in-state rivalry, but I guess if you're Ball State and you're taking on the biggest university in the state, it would qualify as such for them, probably not for IU. When I finish here, I'll get a couple of thoughts out of you, because I know that you were involved in the Florida, or at least watched the Florida International Indiana game last week, sending me a couple of text messages. But let me just say this about Ball State. This is a team, Drew, that in the offseason, when I went to do my power ratings, got the biggest increase of any team across the nation as far as FBS is concerned. And a lot of that was due to the fact that they went through so many injury problems to significant guys last year. You can't lose quarterback Riley Neal. You can't lose running back James Gilbert to injuries and not have it affect your team. With both of those guys back healthy this year, and others, multiple others that came back this year, Ball State got a pretty good boost in the power ratings from me, at least. I think they did from the odds makers as well, just by viewing where they've opened Ball State games so far to date. Ball State comes out of the chute. They beat Central Connecticut, FCS team 42-6, but last week was really impressive. And I understand that it's a letdown game for Notre Dame after their big victory in week 1 over Michigan, where they put their entire spring and summer's worth of focus into one game, came out victorious. You come out as a huge favorite the next week against Ball State, and it's a classic handicapping situation where the underdog should cover. Ball State did, but not only did they cover, they showed up, and Notre Dame ran the football 41 times for 117 yards against this team, which really signaled to me that Ball State has become a lot more physical than what we know of them to be inside that MAC conference. They had to come up with 10 points in the fourth quarter to make the final 24-16. It was 24-6 after 3, but they never stopped playing. I think that when you look at the tempo that they're playing with this year, and they ran 97 plays against Notre Dame. The week before against Central Connecticut, they had 84 plays. So they're averaging about 90 plays per game right now, which is extremely fast. I believe it's the highest number in FCS football right now. Indiana hasn't had to deal with that yet. And I know Tom Allen's defense has been good ever since he took over. In fact, it was a major upgrade first year, even better second year, real good this year. But this is a different deal when you have to deal with extreme tempo like this, and a team in Ball State that can execute, and a team in Ball State that comes off a game where you could call this one a step down in class. No doubt. You just played Notre Dame. You feel like you went toe-to-toe with them, and now you're going to play Indiana. So I think for a lot of reasons, Ball State plus 14.5 looks good to me. Haven't seen enough out of the Indiana offense to like them in this type of double-digit situation. In fact, I would recommend fading them in any double-digit situation right now, the way their offense is going. I didn't see a lot of the FIU game last week. I know that James Morgan played somewhat for FIU. Obviously, you let me in on some of that stuff. But, I just don't think Indiana's ready to be a 14.5-point favorite, and I think Ball State's more than ready to come in as a 14.5-point dog and cover this number.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And, Robbie, I was texting you for the FIU Old Dominion game. They played Indiana
That's
2
right.
weeks ago.
That's
But you know what? The Indiana kind of struggled with FIU in that game, I remember, 2 weeks ago. So I didn't have too much of a bet on next to Indiana. And with the FIU ODU game, yeah, we were texting, how they were shuffling in quarterbacks, which I thought was surprising with the FIU transfer. But we'll get to FIU in a minute. First, we got Temple, Maryland, 51 the total, 16 Maryland. The Terps only laying 16 at home against Temple. This one kind of surprised me, Robbie. What about you?
Well, I think some of it's based on a miserable first half out of Maryland last week, and they did bounce back, and they went crazy offensively in the second half of that game, especially running the football extremely well. This is a real good offense at this point in time, and I think that when you look at Jeff Collins and that coaching staff for Temple, I think there's trouble there, Drew. Fairly close to the situation here in the Philadelphia area. And I do know that there were a lot of Temple players that didn't really take to the new regimen that the SEC coaching staff came in with. It's been a real uphill battle for Collins to get this team to where he wants them to be. And I don't know that the players are responding either. You know, Matt Rule took a Temple program that was pretty much a doormat and turned it into one of the conference's best, if not the best, that one year when he left. And it's going right back in the tank again. And I don't know that they can fish out of this. This is going to be one of those games where you refer to a team like Temple as a cornered animal. You're 0-2. 0-3 would almost signify a bust of a season for them, even though conference season hasn't even begun yet. If you're the head coaching staff, that's how you have to pick your team up. If you lose this game, you just say, hey, the conference season is all that counts. Let's go get them. But I don't know that they're ready to face Maryland. I haven't seen anything offensively where significant improvement is concerned. I haven't seen anything defensively where significant improvement is concerned to like Temple, even in a big plus point situation like this, whereas Maryland, as we saw last week, can not even show up for 2 quarters and still destroy another team that they're better than. So I think for me it would be Maryland or nothing here, Drew. You have to watch the weather. Where I am located here, kind of mid-Atlantic, generally gets the same exact weather that Maryland would get. They get it maybe an hour sooner, but there's going to be rain and substantial rain on Saturday. So this one could be played in, less than ideal conditions. In that case, as long as Maryland hangs on to the football between their quarterbacks and running backs, it's possible they could just hand off and cover that game, win it something in the vicinity of 27-10, 31-13. So for me, it would be Maryland or nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just my question to you, because when I saw this number at 14, now 16, I was like, I just thought it would be in the mid-20s. Do you think this team has quit? I mean, I guess they did only lose to Buffalo 36-29, so in the game the whole time, but they did lose to an FCS team the week before. So do you think they've quit on the coaching staff, Robbie?
I don't know that quit's the best word, but I know that they haven't taken to the style whatsoever. Now, just from a numbers standpoint, Drew, and baseline power ratings, and then we'll compare that to what our eyes have seen so far this season. But power ratings made this game Temple 14, so I can't disagree with where the odds makers opened it. The money has carried it to where it is now at 16, which, like you and I are saying, what we've seen so far out of both of these clubs, there's no way you could play Temple at this point in time. I'd agree with that. Like I said, I don't know that any team quits this early in the season, but I will say that this new regime hasn't really gotten what they wanted out of the personnel. And after all the weeding out that went out last year, I thought maybe they'd come out of the chute a little quicker this season. They didn't. That loss to Buffalo last week, Drew, although you and I might consider that, hey, Buffalo's a pretty good team, especially throwing the football. No shame in losing 36-29. They took that loss real hard, almost as a slap in the face, like how dare Temple lose to Buffalo in this area? How dare we lose to Buffalo? So I think when you put that piece into the psyche puzzle for Temple, it's just not good at this point in time, whereas Maryland, of course, heading into the season with the coaching trouble with DJ Dirk and people didn't know which way they were going to go, I think it's pretty clear cut which way Maryland's talent is going to go right now. This is a team that's going to be there all season long.
All right, Robbie, we got 113-114 UMass, FIU, 60 the total. FIU, the Golden Panthers laying 4 at home. Any opinion here?
They did a number on Massachusetts last year, so you would expect, Andrew Ford and company to maybe want a little bit of payback here. It's a difficult spot for UMass because this is going to be their 4th game in 21 days. Remember, they were in that week 0, 14 mix. that played, and they haven't stopped playing ever since. They've played some tough competition, and they got, the last couple of weeks, at least from a defensive standpoint, they got it handed to them. And Georgia Southern shut them down cold, only 323 yards the week before. Boston College shut them down cold, only 315 total yards. So UMass looking for a defense that they can break out against. I would think that they could have a little more success here against FIU. Butch Davis's team. For me, Drew, I can't get a good read on this club whatsoever. So I probably won't get involved in this game unless I get involved with Massachusetts. We see the total go up a little bit from 59.5 to 60.5. And I think if I were to play the game, I might lean that way because I do expect UMass to come out and score points here. I just, defensively, they're so weak. 622 total yards allowed to Boston College 2 weeks ago. 488 to Georgia Southern, a team that's rebuilding its triple option offense. So you can't like what you've seen out of them, especially having to play so many games in so many days. I worry about the defense. For me, the look might be toward the over, but no specific play on the game just because I can't get a true read on Florida International right now.
All right, Robbie, moving on from FIU in Miami to the Miami Hurricanes, traveling to play Toledo, 57 the total, with the Canes laying 10 on the road. Interesting matchup here, Robbie. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, at least from what I see and hear and read in newspaper articles so far, and again, we're only midway through the week. It's only Wednesday afternoon here. But I think there's an awful lot of opinion toward Toledo. I would push back against that opinion by saying, letter A, most of that love affair for Toledo is the fact that people got to see Miami against LSU and walked away from that game of the opinion that Miami got destroyed. I'd say that there's numbers that don't necessarily support them getting destroyed in that game. LSU, with their new Steve Ensminger-led downfield vertical passing offense, went 11 for 24 for 140 yards against Miami. Those are horrendous numbers by any standards. 11 of 24 for $140, no good unless you run for 400 yards in the game. And then they're, okay numbers, but they're bad passing numbers. Let's back it up with the rushing numbers in that game. LSU, 41 carries for 156 yards, 3.8 yards per carry. The reality of that game is LSU got out quick, took Miami by storm, and then coasted the rest of the way. Or I shouldn't even say coasted. I should say didn't get much done the rest of the way because Miami won the second half of that game 14-6. And I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about these Miami Hurricanes at this point in time. It's a secondary that's extremely strong, veteran-laden. And, it's not Logan Whiteside back there anymore. And I realize Toledo's got really good receivers, but they've lost some at the quarterback position and the running back position. And we're going to see. They played one game against VMI. And, you win 66-3, but who the heck knows what to make of a game against VMI. And then they had a bye week to get ready for this Miami game. Miami beat Savannah State 77-0, I think, last week. Not much to take away from that game, except they took their frustrations out on Savannah State. I'm not so sure I'm on board with this push toward Toledo. I think Miami's the better team. The problem is it's a road game at 12 noon, and you have to be awake when opening kickoff comes. Mark Richt, that's his responsibility to get his team ready. If they're ready, to me, they're the dominant team in this game, and they could stop Toledo's offense from doing too much damage, and then they could score on their end as well.
Yeah, great breakdown, Robbie. Also to add on, Toledo, at least as of a few years ago, recruited South Florida heavily, so kind of get the guys that Miami doesn't really offer, so they'll be pumped up to kind of play against the Canes as well, so could be a side bet there. Robbie, one of my favorite matchups of the weekend, 117-118 Hawaii Army. This is the second longest trek a college football team has ever made in the United States of America. They're going from Hawaii all the way to play Army on the East Coast. 62 the total. 6 Army is actually laying at home. Any opinion on the Rainbow Warriors versus Army here?
Well, here's what's good about Hawaii. They've already faced Navy. So the triple option stuff, they have gotten a full look at, and coming to West Point should at least be a little bit better prepared than they were against Navy. The second good thing again about Hawaii is the fact that they're getting out to these quick starts against teams. And when you look at their schedule so far, Colorado State, they were a bit of an unknown. In fact, Colorado State was a very, very heavy favorite in that game. But Hawaii, once they showed that they could score almost at will against Colorado State, opinions started to change on them. They come back and they play Navy the next week. And sort of a split opinion. I think the line moved towards Hawaii in that game to begin with, then came back towards Navy closer to game time. But people figured that Navy will run the football down Hawaii's throat, control the game. What happened was Hawaii got up 28-0. When you get Navy down 28-0, Navy's not coming back with that run-heavy offense. I think the Naval Academy went on to score like 38 points in that game, but it was nowhere near enough because Hawaii was almost to 60. The Army can't let them get out in front in this contest. Army's going to have to get out in front and make Hawaii play from behind. But that passing offense led by Cole McDonald, and it really is amazing, Drew, because Cole McDonald barely beat out Chevin Cordero for the starting quarterback job right up until kickoff of Colorado State. I don't think we were definitely positive that McDonald would even play the whole game against Colorado State, but he's been nothing but fantastic so far against the teams that they've played. The wide receiving core with Ursua and Bird and JoJo Ward and the running back Fred Holly, all dynamic. They can score in bunches. They can score quickly. If they get out on top, this is a hard game to handicap because it goes both ways. If they get out on top, I don't think Army's coming back, and you don't want Army laying points in that situation if Hawaii gets out 14-0. However, if Army's running game gets out 14-0, it would be the first adversity Hawaii's faced all season long, and it would be interesting to see how they recoup from that. Army's going to try to slow the game down, but that line of thinking, Drew, I think is very, very old school, and I don't know that it applies anymore. And you hear it used so often. They're going to go to the ground game. They're going to control the clock. They're going to limit the possessions, and there's not going to be a lot of scoring. When the other team needs 90 seconds to score a touchdown, that theory goes right out the window. There's no logic to it. Georgia Tech is a perfect example last week against South Florida. Georgia Tech's about a 10-11 possession team. That game scores about 87 points because South Florida can strike quickly. So from a totals perspective, is 63 down to 62, probably in a good spot. But again, there's too many variables. That's probably a great game to bet in-game, a far better game to play in-game than it is to play from the outset.
Good stuff, Robbie. We got Kent State, Penn State, MAC Big Ten matchup here, 64 the total. It looks like Penn State laying 35 in Happy Valley. How do you look to bet this one, Robbie?
Kent State is very much upgraded this year. And what we see out of Kent State is tempo-style offense all of a sudden. We haven't known – Kent State's been a team with brutal quarterback play, and you have to go back basically to Julian Edelman to find and Julian Edelman wasn't even really a quarterback, just like a wide receiver, scat back guy who played quarterback for that team. But they just haven't had competent quarterback play. They haven't had good offensive line play. But they've gone to this extreme tempo style offense. It's somewhat working here. We'll see. It's a very, very different deal when you're doing it against Penn State, a Big Ten type defense that's very good. But the only reason I bring that up first is because the biggest movement on this game has been in the total from 62 to 64. And you might think, well, why would you play over in any game involving Kent State? They're worth about 7 or 10 points against the Penn State defense, but they're just not the same style of team this year. Kent could be worth more like 20 to 23 in this game, and if that's the case, the game could sail over the total because Penn State's not going to be stopped. I think last week against Pitt really indicated that this offense is going to be as good as the offense was last year, despite all the losses that they suffered in that offensive unit. When you come off of 38-45, I think counting overtime against Appalachian State, and then ring up 51 more against Pitt, they're headed to 40 in this game as well. like I say, from a totals perspective, the question is whether or not Kent can give you enough to get over the total. And people playing over because they believe they can, and I would be in that corner as well. I don't know if I could lay that many with Penn State, because Kent State, at least from what we see so far, and like I say one more time, it's a severe upgrade in class. So it's yet to be seen how effective the Kent offense can be. But the style and the early results from what I've seen show me that, if they can get to 2021 here, this game's going to go over the number.
Robbie, next up we got UCF UNC, but that game's postponed. You can follow Robbie on Twitter at RobVenoSports. I'm on Twitter as at DrewMartinBets, and I just retweeted something where Nebraska and UCF, Robbie, have the same open week. I believe it's October 27th, and with UCF losing this game, people talking about Nebraska versus UCF, Scott Frost and company, because UCF needs another Power 5 opponent. That'd be pretty cool, huh, Robbie?
That would be extremely cool, yeah, for both sides, for Scott Frost to play his ex-team and for the ex-personnel to get a shot at their former head coach. I think that would be a really good matchup. Interesting for sure.
Yeah, and Robbie, I guess we just got another change here with 1-2-3-1-2-4 ODU Charlotte. This game wasn't supposed to be on Thursday, was it?
No, they moved that today. They bumped it up a couple of days.
Okay, so one, how does that affect your handicap? And two, what's your opinion on betting it overall, ODU Charlotte?
Well, I tried to read as much as I could on that game when I saw the time switch, Drew, and even the head coaches can't tell you exactly how it's going to affect either side. I think that what happens for first of all, obviously it's done for safety reasons, and both teams, both programs are kind of in the line of fire where this hurricane is coming, so they wanted to get it out of the way. But the Charlotte team has a couple of injury issues that maybe you would like 6 or 7 days to see if you could get healthy, a full practice week to see if you can get guys healthy, rather than just the 3 days that they're going to have before they have to go out and play. So there could be some problems there for Charlotte. However, what we've seen of ODU so far this season, and their new quarterback Stephen Williams has not been great, 25 of 52, 48%. That team, Old Dominion, has been outscored 52-0 in the second half so far this year. So maybe, Drew, we could just cut the whole analysis right there and say, listen, bet Charlotte second half because ODU can't score a point. But again, that'd be a little bit knee-jerk and premature because it's only 2 games. But they haven't run the football well. They only run for 111 yards a game. And surprisingly, Charlotte's been stout at the point of attack. Only 65 yards per game allowed on the ground. So that's a good matchup for the Charlotte defense. They've got a weird quarterback situation going on down there where last year's starter, Hassan Klug, lost the starting job to redshirt freshman Chris Reynolds, who really got the job only because Miami transfer Evan Sheriff's got an abdominal strain. He's out 4 to 6 weeks. But, Klug a little bit complaining that he's no more than a quarterback package player. He's a situational package player. They run him in to, with certain packages at certain times, and they're going to have him return kicks. So I don't like the whole quarterback situation there for Charlotte. It's a difficult game, really, but it's an important game for both of those teams because it's CUSA, it's East Division. They both need the contest. If I had to guess, I would think that Charlotte at home might be a hair bit better, but really not worth playing at this point in time. Like I say, even the coaches can't figure out in reading a couple of articles how it's going to affect their teams having to go a couple days sooner here.
Robbie, interesting one here in the ACC. FSU travels to play at Syracuse and laying 3 on the road. This number kind of caught me off guard. 68 now the total, bought up almost a full touchdown. Any opinion on the Seminoles versus the Orange? Yeah,
it's crazy, right? If you'd have told me before the season started that, just from my power ratings perspective, that when you sit down to do your power ratings, Rob, for the Florida State-Syracuse game, FSU is going to come up a 2.5-point favorite on the road. I'd have said you're crazy. There's a talent gap there. But that's where they came out. Odds makers opened it even lower, opened it at 1.5, pushed up to 3 right now. At some point in time, you would expect that Florida State's offense would get going. But again, there was no more drastic switch in offensive systems, Drew, than the Florida State system left by Jimbo Fisher, and then the Gulf Coast Willie Taggart style that was brought in. We talked about it a lot. This offense, in order to work, it features a lot of quarterback runs, which Florida State just didn't do under Fisher. It demands extreme tempo, 80, 85 plays a game. Florida State only rattled off 65 plays per game last year under Jimbo Fisher. So the transition was as big as any, and Florida State just hasn't grasped it yet. They've got great athletes, but it's the old saying of trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, and that's what they're trying to do here. It might take some time for it to really begin to gel. Syracuse, of course, has gelled offensively. The Dino Babers system with Eric Dungy running it, we saw that in full effect opening day. How they'll perform against the Florida State defense, once that tempo gets going, there's not a lot of teams that can stop them. So it's interesting from the fundamental back and forth standpoint, but value-wise, if you're a guy who goes to the window always seeking value, maybe you think Florida State's the right side here. I don't know, because I think the number's in a real good spot, but at some point in time, Florida State is going to understand what this new offense is, and they're going to play it the way it's supposed to be played. And when that day comes, there's going to be a big breakout. I just don't know that it'll be against Syracuse on Saturday.
Robbie, 127-128, Oklahoma travels to Ames, Iowa, takes on Iowa State Cyclones. 55 the total. Sooners laying 17.5, 18 at Chris. What's your opinion?
Boy, they might be good up to 21 in this game, Drew. And I know, let's give credit where credit's due to Matt Campbell and what he's done at Iowa State, because they are a true, in that 10-team Big 12 conference, I want to call them upper echelon, but it's like so many teams fight for that 4 and 5 spot. They're one of those, though. They're maybe the 4th or 5th best team, depending upon what week it is or who you're talking to, but they become real good. They're no longer the doormat. They're not the team that's one step ahead of Kansas every single year. They got trouble here, though. First of all, Oklahoma's not going to forget what happened last year when Iowa State beat them. And secondly, without Kyle Kemp, they're a different team at quarterback. I didn't know or didn't suspect that Kyler Murray was going to be able to step in right away and ring up numbers like Baker Mayfield rung up as far as points per game are concerned with the Oklahoma Sooners offense. But it's just another reason why, if you don't believe Lincoln Riley is one of the 2 or 3 best offensive coordinators in college football right now, then you're just crazy, because he's as good as it gets. He does not try and fit square pegs into round holes. He's got a different skill set with this particular quarterback than he had last year, making it work right away. You wonder, you listen to these Oklahoma players talk and you read their quotes, and they don't believe anybody can stop them. And after I saw Oklahoma shred Georgia in that bowl game last year, despite the fact that they lost, I don't know that anybody could stop Oklahoma at this point in time. I certainly don't think Iowa State will. It's nice to be at home in Ames. It's nice to have Iowa State being a very upgraded football team over the course of the last couple of years. And it's nice to know that they beat them last season. But I think Oklahoma far superior here. However, numbers do get out of control, Drew, and power ratings are always supposed to keep me grounded. Power ratings showed Oklahoma 14.5 on the road, better than Iowa State. Game open 16.5, which looks like it was bumped a little bit by odds makers anticipating Oklahoma money. And now, of course, the money's carried it even further, so they didn't bump it high enough. But you heard me to start this thing. I think they're probably good up to 21 in that game.
All right, weird things can happen in Ames, Iowa. We move to that area of the country, Troy, Nebraska. So we got Sunbelt versus Big Ten now. 57.5 the total, 11.5 across the board. Robbie, does Troy have a chance to stay within 11.5?
Well, off of that game against Boise, Drew, where I think the majority of college football followers thought that Boise would put up that Troy would put up a better fight at home than they did against Boise. Of course, Boise's a fantastic football team, but they really didn't put up much of a fight at all. Boise went up and down the field. Brett Rippon was tremendous, and that game was a real easy win and cover for the Boise State Broncos. So kind of, it made me believe that without Brandon Silvers at quarterback, maybe Troy is downgraded somewhat. I know they're still good as far as Sun Belt teams are concerned, but these non-conference matchups, it probably could cause them a little bit of trouble. I'll tell you one thing. Tristan Gebbia is probably upset that he transferred out of Nebraska now because he'd be starting this week. Adrian Martinez gets hurt right away. Don't think it's serious, but you'd probably have him starting if he didn't transfer right here and have a chance to show what he can do on the field against Troy. I think the starting quarterback injury puts Nebraska in a bit of a bind. I just don't know what to make of Troy, Drew, to be honest with you. I find that first loss of the season to Boise State, where they were really non-competitive, to be a little bit alarming, and maybe they're just meant for Sun Belt competition this year and not to step out of the league. Nebraska against Colorado loses that football game. The defense really hasn't made any strides, but let's give Scott Frost a little bit of time here. He didn't turn Central Florida around in the first 11 or 12 games either. It was the second year where they really made the progress. So we'll see how it goes for Nebraska. Game where maybe you could play over. I mean, at that number, 60.5, knowing what Troy's defense or how Troy's defense got dismantled by Boise, perhaps Nebraska with even a backup quarterback could do the same here.
Robbie, we're going to the depths of the Power Five here. Rutgers, Kansas, 44.5. The total 2.5. Kansas laying at home. This is a weird one, Robbie. Two teams that haven't gotten off to good starts. Would you be involved, and which side would you look towards?
Yeah, I don't know that you could be involved because there's far too many variables here. Let's say this. Kansas is going to be on a confidence high walking into this game after winning for the first time on the road since like 2009, I think it was, in their last contest. And Rutgers, of course, defensively much improved, but offensively a lot of the same. They've got the true freshman local quarterback, Art Sikowski, who they believe in time is going to be an exceptional quarterback. He was a great high school quarterback, but they don't necessarily have the pieces right now. And I know that that team has worked real hard to try and get better and better. I think they're the better defensive team in this game, but you still have to score some points. Trying to, pick through the garbage and find one piece of garbage that's better than the other from a literal standpoint, if you were doing that, it's hard to do. I don't know which team I would play here. I think that, Kansas laying 4 to me is just not appealing whatsoever. It's a team that can barely win games. I don't think I want to lay points with them, especially with Rutgers' defense. So anything over a field goal, if you're going to play, I guess you look to the underdog. Rutgers defensive based and more than the field goal, probably the way I'd look, but I won't play that game.
Robbie, a couple more games here for today. Also, guys, remember the special text club, 100% free for $30. All you got to do is text Sportsmemo to 33222. That's just 5 numbers, 33222. Text Sportsmemo to that number, and you'll get $30 off anything you want at sportsmemo.com. ECU, Virginia Tech, canceled. Georgia Tech, Pitt. Georgia Tech laying 4 on the road, 52.5 the total. What are you thinking about this ACC clash, Robbie?
Well, I think it was a couple of disappointing losses last week, right? Pitt had high hopes for that in-state rivalry against Penn State, and they just got their doors blown in. All the progress that they thought they had made under Pat Narduzzi, and I'd be in that camp. I thought with Kenny Pickett now the quarterback and things seemed to be taking shape at Pittsburgh, that they would be more competitive, especially off of the Penn State survival opening week against App State. But it didn't happen. None of that happened. Penn State came in. They flexed their muscles. Pittsburgh never got off the deck, and it was a complete blowout. Pittsburgh winds up giving up more than 50 points. And all the derogative statements James Franklin has made towards playing Pittsburgh come true. For Georgia Tech, you get out quickly against South Florida and end up, I think they gave up 2 kick returns for touchdown in that game and 49 points overall. Some of the worst fears for Georgia Tech defensively, especially in the secondary and speed-wise, came true in that game. They lose 49-38. So when you have a divisional game like this is, ACC Coastal, and you have two teams coming off disappointing losses, it's hard to figure out which team is going to respond the best, especially when you have two teams that are somewhat in the equal talent base mode. Can Pittsburgh handle the Georgia Tech option attack? That'll be the biggest question mark. I happen to think Narduzzi's real good at defending a lot of things. He didn't defend Penn State last week, but I think that he can come up with a game plan against Georgia Tech here. And we'll see if Pittsburgh can do anything offensively. Tough game to call, Drew. From a total standpoint, you're looking at a game that's up at around 52.5 right now. Once again, I would just say check your weather for Saturday. This is another game in western Pennsylvania that could be affected by rain during the game. So if it gets to that stage where it's purely a ground game because of heavy rain, Georgia Tech's going to have to hang on to the football, because any of those option pitches turn into fumbles. That could be the difference in a game like that.
Yeah, interesting handicap tidbit there, Robbie. So if there's rain, which it looks like there will be in this area of the country, you think rain in this particular matchup here, Georgia Tech versus Pitt, favors Pitt, or do you think it favors Georgia Tech keeping the ball on the ground?
Well, keeping the ball on the ground is one thing, but with all the pitching and the putting it into the stomach and taking it out that the option requires, the chances for a slip with a wet ball is certainly increase if you're Georgia Tech. So I think turnover-wise, and we can never handicap turnovers, Drew. I wish we could, because if we could handicap turnovers, we'd win about 30% more games than we already do. But I think that the probability certainly for a turnover in the ground game goes way up for Georgia Tech, because they are the team that manipulates the football far more, where Pittsburgh's just a straight handoff team. And Pitt's defense, any recovery there, it could be the difference in the game, and there's no doubt about it. So once again, keep an eye on it if it's a misty type rain, but if it's heavy rain constant through 60 minutes of football, that could be troublesome for Georgia Tech.
Robbie, we got one game left here, Vandy, Notre Dame. I do want to leave you guys with, it is $9 Wednesday, and Robbie has a play on the MLB board going tonight. You can pick it up for just $9. And also on top of that, you can even double up with the $30 off by texting Sportsmemo. All you got to do is text the word Sportsmemo to 33222. So did want to let you guys know about that. Last game up, Robbie, for the day, we got 137-138 Vandy, Notre Dame, 52 the total. Looks like the Irish laying 14 at home, Robbie.
Yeah, we talked about last week some teams where head coaches could have teaching moments, one being Penn State. Hey, listen, guys, we're at home. And coaches love this. When they win the game, but their team plays lousy. And in Penn State's case, 45-38 overtime. James Franklin had a lot that he could coach the following week, and guess what? It turned into a blowout of Pittsburgh. Notre Dame's kind of in that boat here. They barely survived against Ball State last week. Brian Kelly's not going to stand for 24-16 wins at home over Ball State. Too close to call. Didn't run the ball whatsoever. Supposed to be a dominant running team. All that stuff is going to be addressed this week. Then you have the other side of the coin, Vandy, which comes in on another high like they did last year. Remember when they were calling after 2 games for Alabama? When they were going to Alabama, oh, we want Alabama, and they got their doors blown in. It's a game where they don't necessarily match up. Derek Mason does a nice job with that defense every single year, anchor down and all of that. However, this is the first team that Vanderbilt's played this year. They play Middle Tennessee and they play Nevada. 2 teams that are far more finesse than physical. They didn't really run the ball at Vanderbilt. Notre Dame's going to run the ball downhill at Vanderbilt and test their physicality right off the bat. And it'll test the speed of Vanderbilt when Wimbush, it runs a read option or whatever. I just don't know that it's a good matchup for Vanderbilt. And watching that game last week, yes, they moved the football. Yes, they scored a lot of points. They gave away a lot of points too. Because they weren't especially efficient. I think they had 6 trips into the red zone in the first half, and I think they came away with only 20-something points. So they left a lot on the table. I just think it's a good opportunity for Notre Dame here, Drew, from the situational spot that Brian Kelly will have a lot to ride his team for this week. Get on them, get a far better performance at home. I don't think they'll have 2 back-to-back duds at home in South Bend. Point spread looks a little high because you say Vanderbilt's a good defensive team. They can hang. But Shermer, to me, is going to be under a lot of pressure here. They haven't played a defense yet. Middle Tennessee doesn't play much defense. Nevada doesn't play much defense. Different animal here. I like Notre Dame in that game.
All right, Robbie, if you like what Robbie had to say, want to check out his premium stuff on sportsmemo.com, make sure to check it out. He has a play going on Thursday. You can also get his full season for under a dime by using and add on the Sports Memo texted to 33222 to get that extra $30 off. So for Rob Veno, I am Drew Martin. We'll be back tomorrow finishing up college football, every game on the board.